Hello, welcome to the daily, almost less than daily live stream for my coronavirus trends. My name is Greg Farrar. Hello, welcome to there I am talking back to myself again in my speaker. It's always nice to know that my stream is going through, but I don't really need to have an echo like that, so I'll turn it off. This is going to be a little bit of a weird one. I have changed the way I order my graphs, and they're not. I've been working on this quite a bit today and some yesterday, but there are some weirdnesses here, and so we'll see. It may become so problematic that I just say I'm going to stop and do it again tomorrow, but I think this is going to be okay. I think it's actually going to be better than usual, but they're not completely consistent between the three different regions. Anyway, I'll talk about it as I go along. I'll be doing countries, and then states of the United States, and then counties of California. So as we look at our total cases, we will see one of the first things we'll notice that's different from usual is this isn't blue, and that's or blue or purple. The top one has in the past, the top of this list has always been the United States. At this point, what I'm trying to do here, and I haven't quite gotten this done on the countries level, I think it is actually done on the states and counties level, is I'm trying to order this list based on how bad they have it. And that to me comes down to the metric I've been using a lot lately, the daily cases per million. So adjusted by population, how many cases are there of coronavirus in each country, for instance? And we see these in these graphs. We've been seeing it for a long time in the graphs, but it was starting to annoy me that the United States was living here at the top of the graph, even though Brazil had clearly passed it. I'll show you how. In this graph, we can see that Brazil has more daily cases, but even more significantly, Brazil has a lot more cases per million. It's got something like twice as many cases per million. 144 is its DCPM, daily cases per million. And so it's very much past the United States and really ought to be above it. Now, this one doesn't quite sort by DCPM. I'm doing that in the other two sections, because if it did, then Qatar would be way up at the top. Qatar actually is way above either of these two. What we're really doing at this point, what are we actually sorting this list by? I think it's sorting by the number of daily cases, but just for the past 7 days. So not going back through the whole history of daily cases, which really sorted it by total cases, the sum of the daily cases for all days we have. I'm only going back 7 days. So this was my first shot at getting a more reasonable sort order, but then it doesn't sort Qatar at the top where it arguably belongs. On the other hand, does Qatar really belong at the top? It has way more cases per million than anyone else, but on the other hand, it's a very small and doesn't contribute a lot to the world cases. So we'll see. Give me feedback. Tell me if you think we should be sorting by I don't know, by total cases. Should we sort these tables differently? So far, I've really tried to keep the sort order the same in all the tables, so the colors are the same, but it may be time to actually shift this one, the total cases, to be sorted by total cases. So the top one is the top and so on, which is sort of how it is now. Whereas maybe I could sort this table by DCPM. But anyway, for now, I'm sticking with a consistent sort across each tab I have here, each set of graphs. And with that sort, Brazil comes out on top with the most. What we're really doing, I think, is sorting based on this graph. It's close to being sorted by this graph, except it only goes back 7 days. So in total new daily cases, United States now beating Brazil, India in total cases beating Russia. And then we've got Peru and Chile as part of that Central South America cluster. If we look at the total number of cases per million, Qatar, as always, is far ahead, but maybe showing some signs of shrinking. You might imagine, looking at this graph, Even the trend line is starting to say, well, maybe this is leveling off, but you might imagine that it's already leveled off and maybe is even shrinking in growth at this point. Not so much so for Chile or Peru or Kuwait, which is now showing up in our list. Kuwait, I don't think even showed up before. Where is Kuwait in our list? Yeah, it's pretty low, but with this new ordering, a few countries have fallen off. Kuwait has had a pretty high number for a pretty long time, but only 4 weeks or something, which is why when we summed everything over all time, Kuwait didn't make the top 25, and now it's something like 20th. So Kuwait has a problem. It's a warm spot. Kuwait has 200 DCPM. Peru around the same. Chile with 300, and Qatar off everyone else's scale at 700 is in a pretty serious place right now. Oman also just showing up because it's just been rising and it didn't have cases didn't have a whole lot of cases a month ago. Probably still doesn't have a whole lot of cases, but in cases per million, it's a warm spot. Brazil, we are expecting to be a warm spot, and it seems to be. Let's look at Brazil for a minute. Yeah, Brazil just really shows growth. There's no looking at that as anything but upward trending. And then Belarus. Where is the United States now? United States is red. Is that us? Yeah. United States is red. It's still at 60-ish daily cases per million. 60 is just a small number. The United States, compared to its population, is not a warm spot, is not a hot spot, is not doing badly. But then there's the question of there are two kinds of hot spots I've been talking about. There are the daily cases hot spots, and then there's the growth hot spots. So maybe the United States is a growth hot spot. Let's look at the rope chart to answer that. Looking at the rope chart, we see there are quite a lot of countries that are growing right now. Again, this top 25 is based on total cases in recent days. So it hasn't quite gotten to where I think I want to have it, where it's DCPM based top 25. That will bring potentially some weird small countries to the top, but that may be appropriate if the big countries just don't have a problem in terms of daily cases per million. Then maybe we don't want to have them here. Or maybe this chart should be sorted based on the growth rate rather than DCPM. I did do a lot of work today to include populations of even the smaller countries, which gives me a little more flexibility. One of the reasons I was only focusing on the top 25 in all my graphs is I didn't have population data, not accurately, for a whole bunch of the smaller countries, and now I do. So we'll see how we go with this. I may very well be changing my sort, my list in the future, so it's different per graph. But for now, it's consistent. So Oman, interestingly, is the worst in daily cases is the worst growth hotspot, and it is a hotspot by my own definition. Anything above 5% a day is a hotspot. Pakistan, also a hotspot. Egypt is just showing up here as a hotspot with our new sorting order. In South Africa, also as a hotspot. This is pretty close. No, it's actually there. Colombia, we have that's part of the Central South America, I guess, cluster. I'm trying to pick out what these two different. I'm going to turn up my screen brightness so I can see this a little better. We have two different oranges here. We have Colombia and we have something else. Peru. Okay. So there's Peru, part of that Central South America cluster. Peru is showing us up as both a daily cases warm spot and a growth hotspot. So Peru is bad. Qatar, if we look at Qatar, it is indeed it has turned the corner. Just today, we're seeing Qatar turn the corner towards negative growth. So though Qatar has a very large number of daily cases relative to its population, it is now starting to shrink. So it's not actually in such, well, it is in bad shape, but only on one of the two dimensions we measure. How about Chile? How is Chile doing? Chile also seems to be recovering. It's looking like it'll turn the corner soon now. So it's a daily cases hotspot, but it's not even warm when it comes to growth. Is this Chile? Yeah, it's not even warm when it comes to growth. It's cooled off quite a lot and is pretty much neutral in growth. Then let's look at the next one. Well, we looked at Peru, Chile, Qatar. Peru, we've said, is both fairly warm in daily cases and it's growing. So that's a problem spot. Kuwait, also a relatively small country, has had a lot of daily cases, but we can see it's leveled out. DCPM's pretty high, but it is shrinking. So Kuwait was a warm spot, still is in daily cases, but it's shrinking. And Oman and a few of these other. Well, let's look briefly at Oman. Also not a big country, but a warm spot, and very low in warmth, but the very hottest in daily cases per million. The interesting thing here is that if you look at this, Europe is gone pretty much from this list. Not entirely, but all those first wave, or maybe if the first wave was Asia, second wave hotspots in Europe, they've all fallen off the list. Their DCPM is so low they're not even the top 25. Actually, this isn't DCPM, but their daily cases are so low they're not even in the top 25. France is still there, but just barely, very bottom of the list. There was someone here I thought who's Turkey, sort of, but also very bottom of the list. Sweden, very bottom of the list. Well, not really. Sweden is actually still warm. So Sweden is one of the last standing of Europe. But yeah, Europe has really recovered quite completely. Okay, looking at, well, let's look at the world as a whole, just for kicks. Change in cases. World as a whole is still rising. The world as a whole, if it were not the world, would be a warm spot at 2% daily, a growth warm spot. It's been a while since we were seeing that stable time a couple weeks ago. The world as a whole has been rising, and that's, you can see on that rope chart, there are a lot of countries that are rising. Now, a lot of these are relatively small countries, so there's a way that the bigger countries are recovering, but certainly not all of them. We see India as an upcoming, where is India? Where is India? In DCPM, India is tiny, but in total cases, which is what this is based on, the total new daily cases, India is contributing a lot of cases. It's still tiny in daily cases per million. It wouldn't even show up in this graph if I actually were sorting it by daily cases per million. Another argument for sorting each graph separately. But when it comes to total cases, it's number 4 in the world because its population is so large that even with a small, very small DCPM, it's still contributing the total number of cases that's rather large. Yeah, I'm feeling that I need to do some changes in how I do these things because we don't really want to have Oman taking a prominent case throughout our whole analysis. But at the same time, you know, India is important in some ways and not in others. It's very low. It's doing very well DCPM wise, but it has a huge population. So I think different sort orders. Maybe in a couple days I will have had a chance to bring these sorts more in line with what might be the most useful way to sort our countries. All right, let's look at testing. Population tested daily. We have some extreme spikes here. Not many countries above that 0.15 number of population tested daily. Looking worldwide, the testing numbers are pretty sparse and pretty unreliable anyway. But of the ones we have, we probably can believe them. Russia, Qatar, and United States are doing well. Okay, yeah, that's the total versus the top 25. They're doing well compared to everyone else, and the rest, some of them are doing okay. United Kingdom, Canada, Chile, but those three are the only ones that are actually meeting that 0.15 mark. Let's move on. Okay, my graphs have freaked out on me again, so give me a second to reload them. Moving on to the states of the United States. So I guess I come away from that saying, when you look at the number of cases that are happening now, there's not that much happening in the world, it doesn't seem. But India seems to be coming on strong, and maybe one of my graphs at least should represent that. And it does right now, but it's kind of an accident because I'm doing it based on the total cases. If I really were to switch over to DCPM and just say this is all I care about, I think that a lot of significant change in the world would be lost. So the world's still growing, the world seems hot, but it's hot in some places like Central South America and in India that some of them don't show a very high DCPM yet. Okay, now we have the states. Here again, I've changed things completely, and maybe I'll go back to the old way after this. I wasn't super satisfied with the way that the countries analysis went just there. See if I like the states analysis. I'm doing the analysis by state. I have I actually am doing it by DCPM now, and this means that Rhode Island, which had rolled off our graph originally, has now taken first place because Rhode Island, though small, still has the highest daily cases per million. It is actually the hottest place in the United States, even though I believe we've seen it's declining. Let's see, is this let's look at Rhode Island in just as a new daily cases. It is declining, but it was super hot. If we look at Rhode Island as in DCPM, it was up in the 400s. That's hotter even, it's as hot really as New York got. And it's got a few days that are really high. Since I'm doing right now the DCPM, just the recent DCPM, the last 7 days, these 3 points are really contributing to bring Rhode Island to the top. I don't think it'll stay there very long, but for today, Rhode Island is looking like kind of the hottest spot in the country, but small. If we look at the total cases, New York and New Jersey are still way up there, but look how far down we have to go to see them in this thing, which is grouped by DCPM. New Jersey is actually behind Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico, which wasn't even there, has now come to our attention as a hot spot as a U.S. territory. Whereas New York, where's New York? New York has shrunk so far down as a hot spot that it's not even in the top 25, and I had to expand this list to even have New York here. Again, I think I'm going to change it so that this list just gets sorted by total cases rather than trying to have consistency between graphs. But New York, New Jersey, Illinois is good. All these have their dots below the trend line, which does suggest that they're all slowing down, but not California. California has its dots above the trend line, suggesting that it's speeding up. Pennsylvania also looking a little problematic, but let's look at it in case of daily cases per million. Now in this case, we see that in daily cases per million, there are no hot spots. All the stuff that happened weeks ago, all the big stuff, and everything is declining. I don't think I even looked at the United States as a whole. Let's pop back to the rope chart and just take a look at the United States as a whole. On the rope chart, the United States is very slightly rising. It's pretty much flat, actually. It's around 0%. The United States is pretty steady, not rising or falling. And so what that means is that all these states which really had it bad are being replaced by a whole lot more states that don't have it quite as bad. And so this is a very busy rope chart because I've now included the top 40 states instead of just the top 25 I used to have before. I did that so that New York would show up because New York really ought to be here. But nowadays, New York, though it was hugely important on April 12th, nowadays It's just not a major player in these cases. You have to go way down the list to even find New York. And so it is with all the first wave states. The ones that actually are still warm, there are quite a few, not still warm, but warm. You can see New York just screaming past all of them on this scale into oblivion. The only warm states are Maryland, which is the warmest and seems to be rising, Nebraska, which is slightly warm but at least falling, Minnesota we've seen, Virginia, Iowa. Those are the warm states. That's it. We had Delaware. No, actually Delaware I think also is. So nobody else is warm in daily cases per million, but there are a lot of them, and there are a lot of them. If we zoom in a little further, there are a lot of them that are slightly warmer than that. If we actually go into if we look at the hundreds, we can see there are a ton of states that are kind of in the upper cool range, and all these add up, and a lot of them are rising. We can see like Alabama and Wisconsin, South Dakota's falling, New Mexico, Louisiana. All of these seem to be, according to this graph, seem to be rising. We'll see that better on the next graph. So there are just a whole lot of states that back when New York was happening, they were a little lower, but they're not recovering, and they're either horizontal or rising. And so we see this terrible mess. Let's just look at it a little more clearly by getting rid of some of these points and say, which of these, of the ones that really have the problems in daily cases per million, which of them are still rising? And this kind of looks good. The states that are the worst, or that have been the worst at least, and still are the worst really, that have been the worst for the last week, they tend to be falling, I would say. We have a few flat. Iowa is still flat. Delaware is flat. Arkansas, but they tend to be falling. So we have what might be a good trend where and it is a good trend, where the ones that were the worst a month ago have gotten a lot better. But we then have this offsetting pattern of a whole lot of states that are just getting a little bit worse, just a little bit worse. There's no sharp hot spots. There aren't even warm spots mostly, but there are just enough upwards momentum on 40 other states or 20 other states that it's offsetting the recovery in those few states that really had it bad. But it also makes it hard to point fingers at any particular state and say, that's the one, because there just aren't any that are really particularly bad. Our rope chart is also much noisier now because we have 40 states again in it. Next time maybe I'll shrink this down to just the ones that are that have the worst growth, if I can even do that. Probably can, we'll see. But Guam, so we have these little ones like Guam, the very smallest. This is 40th. I'm not going to spend much time on Guam except to say it's growing very fast, but it's super tiny. Montana, also very small in cases, but growing very fast. And then we get into the states we've been hearing about more recently, Arkansas and so on. Let's clear out some of the noise here. I want to do that by just focusing on the top few. Of the ones, this is actually, I think this is going to be an interesting graph here, because this is ordered by DCPM, the ones that are hottest, but it's showing graphs based on their growth rate. How are they changing, not how hot they are. So it would be great if all our hottest states were shrinking, and it would be even greater if they were all shrinking and if they were all cool in a growth sense and accelerating, cooling in a growth sense. So far, that's the case. You look at the top 5, there's not a single one above 0. So the states that are the daily cases hotspots, the ones that have the most daily cases per million, are also the ones that are shrinking. So that suggests that the hottest places are cooling. Keep going, we just keep seeing that. It takes Arkansas before we see a reasonably hot spot in daily cases per million that's also growing and accelerating. Other than that, the real problems are all pretty good. Arizona, also a state that's in that somewhere near the top, though pretty far down, but it is actually shrinking, or is growing. It is in the top and it's growing, but not accelerating. So that's a problem place there. It's problematic across both of our metrics, the hotspots in terms of daily cases and the hotspots in terms of daily growth in new cases. Let's just look at some of the states that we tend to care most about. I mean, we can already see that since this is ordered by hotspot, that the states that our listeners care about most, like Colorado and California, are not serious, are not really serious hotspots. Colorado, I had to literally go in today and take out some data points. Some of these were zeros already, but some of them were 20,000. And I know we did not have 20, this was in the, not per million, but 20,000 cases. We did not have 20,000 new cases on March 31st or May 31st, and this was saying we did, so I just zeroed those out. It means that our Colorado data is at least a little bit better than the crazy stuff we've been seeing, but we can really only look at these points, these zeros are all wrong, and say, well, Colorado might be around 40 or 50. That's cool. Not super cool though, not, India cool, less than 10, but it's cool. Colorado is pretty cool. California is in the same range, 50 or 60. Also not a warm spot even, but it's enough that if it heads upwards, it'll be a problem. Let's look at Texas. Texas also way down the list. Rhode Island we have for comparison, but I'm just going to take that out. I don't think anybody here cares about Rhode Island. Correct me if I'm wrong, except just that it's a very interesting hotspot. It has been, now rapidly cooling. Colorado, on this scale, well, we can't believe the trend line. California, Texas, both about in the same place. Neither of them great, but compared to New York has recently, just in the past week or so, has passed these and is now becoming insignificant in daily cases per million. Ohio, let's just look at 40 some. There are just a whole lot of states that are in kind of, they're spread around between 0 and 100. And so there are a lot of states that are close to or heading towards being warm spots. And there are so many of them, again, that it pulls the United States up. But not many that really stand out. When we look at this graph as a whole, there's not very much interesting happening here. Did I already look at which ones are warm? If not, I'll just take another look at that. Or if I did, I'll take another look at that. Delaware is cooled. Illinois, Virginia, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Maryland. Those are the warm spots. None of them hot. Nobody's hot. No hot spots among our top states. And in terms of growth, the ones that are growing in really wild and interesting ways are small states that still, they could become warm spots if they keep doing this, but so far Guam and Montana are certainly not showing up in DCPM, so they're too small for this to be something to worry about. Just for fun, let's look at, where is Louisiana on our list? Where's Louisiana on the list? There it is. Louisiana, a growth warm spot, growing very slightly. It's actually had a few days that are pretty high, 5% growth, but nothing serious. California, if I didn't already zoom in, I think I did, but again, we have to look through the list to find it, because in terms of DCPM, California is very small, but since I'm here in California, I know that people are listening from California, I'll focus on it for a minute. It is also a growth warm spot. This is kind of significant. California continues to have this 3%, pretty significant growth. It's not hot, but it's well on its way. It's midway between warm and hot in its growth rate, and it's been there for a long time. So California is troubled right now still, and has been for a long time, for weeks and weeks. It's just not showing recovery, and it's one of the worst? How does it go? When we look at the total states? Oh, I haven't really pointed out, maybe I did, the hot spots: South Carolina, Utah, and someone else, North Carolina, are hot spots in terms of growth, as is North Dakota. So we see these small places that haven't made our rankings here, but they have something like an epidemic happening there. Daily growth at more than 5%. There are quite a lot of states that are hot spots, and there are a whole lot of states that are warm spots. And so, in spite of the recovery of the really big hot spots of some time ago, the United States remains flat on average. A very mixed bag here. And then I haven't mentioned, well, Colorado, can't believe that line because of all those zeros, but Michigan is looking very good. Delaware, Connecticut, Minnesota, Illinois, a lot of states are way below that zero line as well. So United States pretty much break even. A lot of states still growing, but quite a few shrinking, and it's just spread pretty evenly across that continuum of who's growing and who's shrinking, with a few outliers. Rhode Island still testing, New York testing very high levels, probably New Jersey and here New Mexico. We're getting very good testing. And now we actually have all 40 states in here. We can say that even the worst of the 40 has tested 3% of the population. So testing nationwide is really very good. Percent of the population tested per day, I'm not going to try to list them out because there are so many, but there are a whole lot of states here that have tested more than that 0.15 number, but then a whole lot that haven't. More than half of what we are seeing here haven't. There are some very strange numbers here for Puerto Rico, certainly not to be trusted, but if we look at which states have tested below the 10% mark, are getting positive tests, most states, I'd say, just eyeballing it, most states are testing below the 10% benchmark, and almost everyone who hasn't is heading that way. So states are on track to eventually cross that benchmark. Just looking at this as sort of a bar, I'd say half to 2/3 of states have met that benchmark. So let's look at California now. Now here in California, again, I've switched to this DCPM ordering, daily cases per million. But we still see Los Angeles by far the most cases, Riverside, Orange, and so there are these different ways of looking at it. Yes, the ordering is by DCPM, but really DCPM is not the way to order things on a table like this that's showing the total cases. So probably just ignore the labels here, and I'm going to say I want to start labeling every chart differently. But it's worth noting that in DCPM, Imperial, Kings, Tulare, it's you have to get down to 4th place before we have Los Angeles and Riverside as the major, which are the major players in total cases. When just looking at the past 7 days of daily cases per million, they're not at the top. They're not quite at the top of the list. Riverside, yeah, okay. I don't usually spend much time on that graph. This is the graph where DCPM ordering is appropriate. And here we see some wild stuff happening. Crazy, crazy stuff. Imperial, which I keep pointing out has this hot spot, has gotten ridiculously hot in the past week. Imperial has a DCPM of 2,500. Now remember, we were struggling to find 100 DCPM when we looked at the states. There were some. No one had 500. And even Qatar, the hottest spot in the world, has only 700, or maybe now it's down to 500 or 600 and dropping. Now here's Imperial, just one data point, but we've had others that are also extraordinarily high, above 1,000 for several of its recent data points. and one of them at 2,500. So I read another article about Imperial. It still has something to do with a whole lot of people who live in Mexico who are U.S. citizens who live just over the border. Some of them in or near Mexicali, Mexico, coming to Imperial for their treatment. And Imperial hospitals have started turning them away, or what is they're on bypass? Is that the word? They just say, if you have coronavirus, we can't take you need to go to some other hospital. And then it's spreading out, I think, still to other hospitals in Imperial. But there's some sort of a massive influx of cases from Mexico, which is interesting because Mexico it's not super dense in coronavirus. It is part of the Central South America cluster. But if we look at Mexico as a whole, it's maybe ninth in DCPM. Significant for sure, but still only at 30. Mexico itself is at 30. And unless all of Mexico is pouring into Imperial County for treatment, you can't imagine, I can't imagine how we'd get 100 times that much DCPM. So maybe this is a data anomaly, but we've seen a whole lot of these numbers that are very high, and there certainly are news stories now, a couple of them, that say there's something really problematic happening in Imperial. Maybe it just has something to do, maybe it's a social factor that the healthcare in Mexico and around Mexicali maybe isn't as good as the healthcare in the United States in Imperial County. And so a lot of people just go there when they're at death's door because it's the place to survive. So that's Imperial, way still above everyone else and showing some extraordinary numbers in the for that one daily cases per million. Maybe that's not an average of 7 days. The graph doesn't say so. I think this may just be an individual day that was extraordinarily high. So we'll keep watching. The next graph, I think, averages 7 days at a time. Kings County still also showing that. I looked up where this was and now I've forgotten. I actually don't know where Kings County is. Maybe it too is Southern California. Maybe it too is on the Mexico border. I don't know, but they also are having a pretty big spike. But 200, we're talking 200 here, not 2,000. It's Kings County, and also we can see a little bit of flattening. So Kings County, the latest day at 200. Yes, it's warm, but not hot. Imperial is certainly hot, white hot. Los Angeles is both at the top of the list in terms of DCPM and has a tremendously high population compared to some of these counties. So this is probably the most important line on this graph. Los Angeles, a slightly warm spot, but with a huge population. That's a big deal in terms of the number of people who will get it and who will die from that. And then we have San Bernardino, Marin, all of these cool, and then no one else over 50. So California as a whole is around 60 DCPM. That's kind of getting into a problematic area, but it's upper cool, and it's not really even warm, but it is caused by certainly I think by Los Angeles more than anything. These two are probably not a major contributor in spite of their outrageous percentages, huge number of people by population that have it. They're not a major contributor to the total California numbers. Now let's look at Imperial here. Now Imperial has a 80% growth rate in the most recent day, and it has some other crazy growth rates, 30%, 50%. We don't usually see above 5%. 5% is a hot spot. So in growth, Imperial is also an outrageous, and this is averaged over 7 days, I think. There's something extremely hot happening in Imperial. Is that right? Am I messing this up? Because why isn't Imperial showing us? No, what was I just looking at? I was looking at something and seeing huge numbers, and now when I zoom back out, what's happening here? It's almost like I'm seeing different numbers when I look at different places. I'm very confused all of a sudden. Yeah, that's Imperial. It's huge. All right, I don't understand. Where is its trend line though? Oh, it's because it's been going on for so long that Imperial, it's had much lower rates. It's had very low rates sometimes recently. Imperial's trend line is not that high. The trend line is only 5%. That actually is high. That is a hot spot. But its trend line is not 80%. So, well, this is an outlier for now for sure, but there are some other really high ones. Hard to know what's happening with Imperial. Let's look elsewhere. Imperial does not have a lot of people in it. And this is Madeira. Madeira is showing up now, but also has not been a big provider of cases, but it is very hot right now. Small cases, very hot. 15% growth rate. Monterey, similarly, not that many cases, but it continues to have this very high growth rate. The latest day, which I think is an average of 7 days, the legend doesn't, or the titles don't say it here, has a growth rate of 8%. Monterey is problematic right now. San Benito and San Joaquin also hot, growth hotspots. Imperial, as we've seen, is a growth hotspot. We have a lot of growth hotspots in California when we start looking at DCPM. If we looked at this yesterday, it wasn't clear that we had some of these because they're small places, but growing very rapidly. It's like I want a graph that says, what are the... I've been thinking about this hypothetical report that shows, that multiplies somehow the hotness in terms of the total number, not the total number, well, maybe even one that does total number, but the hotness in DCPM and the hotness in growth. But anyway, these charts do show the hotness of different areas, and we do see a generally good trend. You know, when you look at this graph, when we look at it as the counties that really have it worst, a lot of these are counties we didn't see last time because the counties we were looking at last time were the ones with more cases. But these now are the ones that actually have the more cases per million, which I think is the more relevant number. Well, it depends how you look at it. In some sense, the aggregate of who has the most cases, that gets aggregated into the previous report, which is say how is California doing as a whole. But when we want to look at how individual counties are doing, I think it's more relevant to look at DCPM. I'm kind of on the fence about this, so feedback is appreciated. Are you more interested in the places that have the most total cases or the most cases per capita? I've gotten some feedback that says cases per capita is what we really want to see. But if that does then take things out of these reports sometimes that are pretty significant counties and brings in places like Caluso that we've never heard of before, because Caluso now has a high DCPM. I don't know, maybe I should throw away all the counties with the smallest population and then do the analysis. I got to think about it more. But anyway, in terms of the sheer hotness by county, this graph shows us exactly that. And it looks actually better in some ways than California has looked in previous days. We have some pretty hot spots, but we also have a lot of counties that are declining and that are cool. More than half, I'd say, are declining, are this sort of group, and that's the almost declining or close to declining. They're cool, 1% or less, and declining. All right. Testing by county. Let's look at the testing percent population tested by county. Of the hotspots, again, because that's what we're focusing on today. Yeah, that's not how I wanted to zoom. How many have met the requirements? I think maybe I want to put in all the counties in this graph also. Maybe I just put in all the counties. So many ways to do it. Of the hotspots, Imperial, Los Angeles, Kings, San Francisco, and Napa have met the 0.15. The rest have not. All right. I don't have the other number, the number of positive tests. So this is kind of a shift here away from what I've been doing because I am focusing just on the highest DCPM. Again, I'm a little on the fence about whether that was a good idea. But certainly these reports now show us where there are problems in the sense of a high number of cases per million. And then within those, within the high number, the ones places that have a high number of cases per million, how are they growing? I still like that. I think even if there's a place like India that has a huge number of cases but has a very low number of cases per million, I'm still inclined to say they're not a hot spot yet. We don't need to think about them yet, because if they grow, then they will become a hot spot in terms of cases per million. But for now, they are cool. They're cool, and the focus can be on the places that really have right now an epidemic problem, an epic problem. Okay, so California looking a little better by this analysis, but still with a whole lot of very hot spots. Well, a number of hot spots and a number of cool spots, maybe 6 cool counties and 4 very hot ones. And then there's that crazy stuff happening in Imperial. At the state level, let's go back and see a little bit what the rope chart's looking like at the state level. Yeah, the rope chart's all over the place in the state level, but it's kind of split down the middle by that 0 line. So the states are maybe very slightly rising. We do know the United States is still slightly rising. So this thing is far from over. If there's one thing we can see here, on focusing at the United States level, this is far from over. There's still a lot of states that are growing. Some of them have gotten over it, maybe half of them, the first wave definitely, but there are a lot of states that are still growing. And also at the national level, we see that. Looking at the rope chart nationally. I don't mean nationally, I mean by nation. Yeah, at the country level, the rope chart it's very ropey. It looks very ropey. There are no extreme outliers, but we've sometimes seen this sort of 5 to -5 as the range of the rope. We see 8 to -4, so it's shifted upwards by a point or two, and by 2 points really. And so the world as a whole is also kind of a mixed bag. Quite a lot of nations still growing, and the average is growth. So we're not out of the woods here, and there's not a clear trend at the national level, at the state level, or at the county level. There's not a clear trend towards recovery. So that's not good news, but that is the news. My name is Greg Farrar. Thanks for listening. I'll be back, and we'll see where